Well, welcome everyone. My name is Kay King and I'm a member of the conference committee, and I'm delighted to have you here after lunch. I just want to point out a couple of items before I introduce our speaker, Rabbi Lynn Liberman, and that's our evaluation form. And we'd just like you at the end of the conference to turn this in, and it's nice to mark it right when it's fresh. So you'll say breakout session number 2 on here, and so when we're done with this presentation, if you could fill that out. And then you can drop it as you leave the building today. And I also just hope you got outside a little bit at lunch because it's gorgeous, so thank you for being here. This session is Healing the Spirit Through Story and Listening, and I'd like to give you a little information about Rabbi Liberman. So actually, she's a chaplain, a board-certified chaplain, and she is Jewish, and she works for a number of organizations, but Jewish Family Service of St. Paul. And she's a community chaplain, but she's also the on-call chaplain for Regents Hospital, Gillette's Children's Hospital, and M Health Fairview Hospitals. Can you imagine? So Rabbi Liberman also volunteers for police and fire in Mendota Heights, West St. Paul. They share the same fire and police services. And she also is a spiritual care disaster responder for ARC. And she's also a member of the Metro CISM team and the Children's Hospital Ethics Committee, and on the executive board of Neshama, which is the Association of Jewish Chaplains. So I've had the great pleasure of working with Rabbi Lynn a number of times in my role at NAMI, Minnesota, and just terrific to work with. And she also has her business cards up here as you leave. You're certainly welcome to take a business card, and also Jewish Family Services brochure is up there, so welcome.
Terrific.
And she'd like to take questions throughout, so you don't have to wait till the end for questions. So,
absolutely.
Well, thank you.
All
so,
right.
Rabbi Liberman.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to add, because it didn't get on there when they wanted the information, just if I'm not busy enough, I actually also am delighted to be back in hospice. I'm a casual for Our Lady of Peace Hospice, so that's a very special work. Well, I'm really glad you're here, because I think if I was you, I'd kind of be out there. So. Thank you for showing up. What I'm going to do today is to just share a very narrow kind of idea, but in depth. So it's a little piece of the work of being a chaplain. And it's one of my favorite parts of being a chaplain. Now, I actually know that I have a couple shills in the room, some colleagues here who are chaplains. So hopefully you'll smile nicely and go, yeah, that's what we do. But what we get to do that is the best part of my work is I get to listen to stories. I get to hear and listen to what other people say. So I'm going to invite us all to have a little bit of that experience and then build on that experience about what the power of not just telling the story, which is exceedingly powerful, but being a listener to that story and what that means. And we're going to look at it a little bit with science. There's actually some science behind this, and some of the Jewish tradition, what it has to say about it, which will arc through other faith traditions, because I'll look at it through some of the biblical stories. But I'm going to begin, actually, with a story. This is a favorite story of mine that I like to tell, mostly because of the message of the power of story. This is from the Hasidic tradition. It's a midrash. And this is the story about the Baal Shem Tov, the way he's often known as the Besht. And the Besht was the leader of his community. He had the responsibility that if something wasn't going right in the community, he would have to intercede on their behalf. And the way he would do that is the custom was to go to a place in the forest. And when he got to that place in the forest, there he would meditate and he would have lit a fire. Having done all three of these things, the disaster would be averted. Now, the Besht was a magnificent teacher, and he wanted his traditions to go on, so he went and taught it to the next leader in the Jewish community, the Maggid of Mezrich. And the Maggid of Mezrich, unfortunately in his day, had the same kind of situation come up, and so he too went to that place in the forest. He says when he got there, Master of the universe, listen, I don't know how to light that fire. But I do remember the words of the prayer, and I'm in this space. That should be sufficient. And it was. He, too, is a teacher. He wanted the traditions to go on. Welcome. Come on in. Welcome. And he taught his student, Rabbi Moshe Leib of Sasso. Now, He too, unfortunately, in his generation, you can probably figure it out, he too, for the people, encountered a challenging circumstance. And he too would go to the forest and would say, I actually don't know how to light that fire. I actually also don't recall the words of that prayer, but I'm in the right place. That should be enough. And it was. One more generation later, and he teaches this skill to Rabbi Yisrael Rishin. Now, poor Rabbi Yisrael, he's in his office, and a calamity is about to befall the people. And he's sitting in his chair. It's a stuffed chair. You can imagine probably in an old office with books everywhere, and he's leaning on the chair, and his head is in his hands. And he says, Dear God, I'm unable to light the fire. I actually don't know where in the forest I would go. The words of the prayer I no longer have. But what I have is the story. And that needs to be enough. And it was. What we're interested in is the story. And we beg of God, in this tradition, to also listen to us, to our story. So now I'm going to invite you into a moment of experiencing this. So first is to say, you'll need to be just a little brave. But if people don't want to participate, that's totally fine. You're welcome to just sit. This just take a couple minutes. But I want to give you a taste of this experience. So in a moment, I'm going to give out a topic. You'll see that it's one that you all are going to have some sense of familiarity with. And I'm going to invite you to become both a teller and a listener. So here's what you do. You're going to find a partner, and it could just be somebody who's sitting next to. If you know them, great. If you want to be adventuresome and get up and move to somebody you don't know, terrific. And you really need to try to do it in pairs. Kay's going to help me out. If somebody is left as a 3, she's going to make it into a pair. So I don't know how many people are in the room. This is terrific. But hopefully we can do it all in pairs. And again, an invitation. If you're not comfortable, just please sit, and we'll come back to the group in a moment. And you're going to get in a pair. If you can, face each other. One person is going to start. You're going to have both roles. One person will be the teller. One person will be the listener. Here's what you do. Teller, just tell what you know. I'm going to give you a topic. Listener. Listener. All you need to do is to listen intently. Don't ask questions. If you need to, sit on your hands. If you're Jewish, you know what I mean. Right? Teller, you can use your hands. Right? So you're just going to tell. And here's what you're going to tell about your name. You're just going to tell the other person about your name. Now, it could be the name that you have. It could be a name because you got married. It could be a nickname that you would like to have. Just tell about your name. So you're going to know when to start because I've got these beautiful Tibetan bells. I'll cling them to start. They'll chime again to switch, and then they'll chime again to end. You'll have about a minute. Okay? Any questions? Make sense? Find a partner. When you switch, you're going to switch just the person listening versus the person telling. Every person is going to have both roles. Okay, is everybody good? Anybody left without a partner that would like one? Everybody has a partner? Please come in. Perfect timing. Anybody? We still need it in 2s. Okay, we have one person who just joined us. Welcome. Okay, here you go. You're going to know to begin, and you'll know to stop when you hear it again. Begin.
keep your volume turned down for now.
Okay.
In these intermediate times, just in case you need to talk to anyone else or whatever.
Oh, okay.
Unless you prefer me to just keep you live the whole time.
No, it's totally fine.
If you need your mic back on, just make eye contact or say hi sound.
You'll probably hear me after the second switch, you'll hear the third bell, and that's probably when to put it back on. Thank you. Switch. The other person is the listener. The first person now is the listener. The other person is the teller. Switch roles. Say your last sentence. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. That was very powerful for me. Thank you. So first I want to say, and then we're going to ask you to reflect on this, the stories that you've just heard are sacred. They don't go anywhere, right? Unless you have permission of the person who told it to you. So that's just the one rule I want to leave you with. It's a sacred possession that you now hold. So what was it like to be a listener? Just raise your hand or shout it out. What was it like to be a listener? Yes?
I would say it was hard to be a listener with masks on. I wanted to look her in
Yes.
the eyes and look at her face, but I don't know whether it's because of all the noise or my own hearing or whatever, so I had to turn like this, and I wanted to be looking at her, but I couldn't.
Thank you for saying that. I actually hadn't really thought about that. You have pointed out beautifully, one, the challenge that all of us caregivers have had during this pandemic to fully be present to another is learning how to use this part of your head. And what you've pointed out is how important this whole activity is. Thank you. Others, listeners, other reflections?
I had difficulty being a listener because of all the talking that was going on in the room.
Yeah.
And if it had been just the two of us without any other people, I would have been able to have heard her more clearly.
Okay.
It was just distraction.
Distraction.
It was more difficult to focus.
Yeah. You know, if anybody ever, either you were a kid or you are a parent of kids, right? That other noise in the room, right? How can they do that? I saw a hand here. Yes.
So it's sometimes hard as a listener that you want to interject and ask questions.
Yes.
And so it's like, I caught myself, shut up.
Yeah.
But it's, yeah.
So I'm going to pick up on that. I see somebody else was going to say that. What was that like when you said, what was that like when you don't ask, just listen?
I found it limiting to direct the conversation. Like, you want to try to keep pulling information out of the person. You can't do it, and if they're stuck or like silent, and don't know how to continue, then how can you continue the conversation?
Okay, beautiful. I don't know if everybody could hear the pieces I heard. I wanted to help direct the conversation. If they got stuck, I wanted to be there to help them, to unstick them, right? We're going to talk about what it means to be the listener. One last idea about listening, yes?
So because of all the surrounding slang and because we said speaking with a mask, it was difficult to hear. So I found myself resorting to what I do at concerts, which is I was in my head. I wasn't looking. I was really concentrating on listening so that I could hear every word and try to take it in. And I had all sorts of reactions, but haven't had a chance to share them.
So, and I love that. One is you lowered your head, you physically did something to get into the listening, and You have something you really want to say, right? But you were the listener. Teller, what did you experience as you were telling to this person who was really working on listening? Anybody can think about that? What was that like? The teller, yes.
I made sure I did it like this long story in 2 sentences.
You self-edited, yes. And what I'm going to say, because you're going to hear me say this again, is we all do that all the time. However, what I want to do is give permission here. It's your story. No need to edit. It's your story. Say it that way. I did. Otherwise, frankly, I think this room could have kept going for the whole hour and we'd be gone. So yes, I will own that. But I'm going to emphasize this. It's your story. You get to tell it the way you'd like. So you did. You edited it because you had something you wanted to get to, and you got it out. Any other comments about being the teller to a person that was assigned to listen to you? Yes?
I didn't think I had that much of a story about my name, so I started making excuses.
Ah, okay. Right. One last comment, yes?
I wasn't sure if you meant first name, last name, or both, so I just used both in mine.
Right, and I intentionally left it vague and tried to also give you some ideas. Some people don't know anything about the origin of their, say, English name. I'm much better about the origin of my Hebrew name. Jewish people often have several names, so I would probably have said, well, this is my Hebrew name and this is what it means, right? So absolutely. One last comment.
To go along with that, I found myself finding out or being curious about even more about what my name actually meant as I'm speaking. So I started to then go, oh, well, that goes into that, and then that's why that.
Yes.
That deepens.
Yes. So what happens is what you're relating, thank you everybody so very much. What you're relating is you have curiosity about the other because you're listening, which kind of provokes a little curiosity like, I wonder if I could know more about my own name. Right? I hadn't really thought about that before. But now that I'm listening, something is coming up for me. The power of story. Just kind of sit with all these feelings and these comments as we go forward. Again, we all have a story to tell. And one of the best things about it is that we hope, and I hope that by the end of our time together, that we will all encounter people who are very interested in being a good listener, a listener to hold your story. So I want to talk about how this works a little bit. And Kay's going to hand out now, I'm going to ask you to do something as a teacher. This is always questionable because you're going to look at the whole handout. So try not to. But she's going to give out a handout because I want you to see this picture that's there. When I was a kid, as she's handing that out, when I was a kid, I visited Chicago. I have fall nose syndrome, right? The stuff is making my nose run. I visited Chicago because my grandmother lived on the south side. I don't know if anybody knows south side of Chicago. The incredible museum there is Science and Industry Museum. If you've never gone, I haven't been in a number of years, but I would advise you to go. You go to the Science and Industry Museum, and it is a plethora of things to see. And in my youth, you walk in. See, everybody's looking at the great pictures there. I promise we're going to look at it. Okay. When you walk in, at least in my youth, you walk into this very big hall, you go left, and there was an entire display about hearing, to all the ramifications and ideas about how we hear. And what was really cool to me as a kid, I did not know I was going to become a chaplain when I grew up, but I loved this ear that was like yay big, that was in the middle of this hall. And it had big lobes on the outside, and you could walk into it and be inside of the ear. And then, of course, it told you all about how this thing worked. And it really captured my attention, because what is going on? How does the ear function? This thing collects sound. It's benign as it does that. The picture of the animal is a perfect example of that, right? Those big ears. It's just collecting whatever is happening. It's not until you go inside that you get any understanding of what in the world has been collected, right? What happens is that the sound waves that are getting collected in those big old ears are going to run into the bone inside of your inner ear. This is a little science, and I'm not going to go very much further than this. And it's by electrical impulse that it begins to make sense to the rest of your brain, right? So that's a really important thing to note, that it's the inside of the ear, not the outside, It's the inner part. Begin to take in the meaning of the sound. Now here's a little thing in Hebrew. I'm going to dip into the Jewish tradition a few times. This thing is called an ozen, this ear thing. If I want to not topple over, I want to make sure that my izun is in good condition. You can hear the words are very similar. Ozen, izun. Izun means balance. So if you have an inner ear infection, maybe you've had that experience. You're a little off balance. Right? That's why that works. To be physically well, we need to be balanced. To hear well, we need the balance of taking in not just the sounds, but what those sounds become, what they mean, what they are interpreted to. And what I like about that picture of this little animal, the big ears that are collecting, is the beautiful face. Right? I think of it as a face that's understanding, that's taken in meaning inside and understanding. Now it's an animal. I'm not going to interpret what it thinks it's understanding, but think of it as us, right? We take it in deeply. We take it in so we can really digest what those sounds interpret. That's being a listener. The teller is what is collected here. So now here's some more interesting mechanics for you. I am a lover of the moth. Anybody else love the moth?
The radio hour?
Well, there is a book, but it's the moth storytelling. So, yes. So if you're not, you will be by the end of today, and I get no money from them. But you can listen to the Moth Radio Hour on Sundays. That's a great way to do it. And there are live moth presentations on both sides of the river. M-O-T-H. Well, it's, yes, we won't go into where that all comes from, but it's not the critter, it's the storytelling. Now, what they have done, for those who are less familiar, is the Moth is all about real stories from real people being told to audiences. So I'm not talking about us doing this for an audience. Your audience is going to be a listener of one. But what they have learned are some powerful insights that I really want to share with you. The first is what they discovered when they were just inventing this thing called the Moth was that in the venue of telling stories, so a person up on stage telling a story to live people in the audience, what they discovered is that the storyteller and everyone in the room began to breathe in unison. That was by observation. And that got the Moth creators curious about what goes on when you hear a story from somebody. The heart begins to beat in sync with the teller and the listener. Right? Pretty cool. They wanted to see if there's actual even more science behind that. Now you might have had that experience. Right? Have you ever listened to a story from a friend and you're like, oh, right? Tell me more. Right? Or, oh, my breathing is really picking up because your breathing is really picking up. Right? It's kind of that, and there's actual science to that. So by example, Uri Hassan, and I have on the back of the sheet, you don't need to turn it over, I have a bibliography, you can go read more about it afterwards. He found that when a person is listening and taking in, so not here, just not here, but taking in that inner ear, taking in the story, their brain activity begins to couple. Right? This is in the world, I'll just say, of polyvagal kind of things, if you know anything about that. We're not going to dip into it too far. The brains align, right? The teller and the listener sync up. And actually, it has a term. It's called speaker-listener neural coupling. Pretty cool, right? They used an MRI machine to actually prove this out. So if you know how those machines work, is that when something is happening, they'll light up. So they actually had two people, one telling, one listening, and they put them in the MRI, and what they found was that synced parts of the brains were actually lighting up. Wow. Listener and teller. The one catch is, and now you're going to see the little push I'm going to make here, the listening part of the session. The one catch is the listener really has to listen. You have to sit on your hands, right? You have to really be engaged, be attentive as a listener. Another scientific study was done. This was done in Denmark. And they looked at how listening to stories, especially parts of a story that can trigger emotions, what is the effect of that? So in 2011, in Neuroimage, a report was published where they found that the listener's heart rate actually does go up as you're engaged in the listening with the teller, right? Not only that, and I love the comment about the masks. Not only that, but they noticed, and they measure this, eyebrows raise on the eyes of the listener, not just the teller, but the listener. They noticed that there was an increase in blinking on the part of the listener. And they even noticed that palms were getting sweaty, right? In the exchange of listener and teller of story. That means that the listener is truly listening to what is going on. One more. This one's an interesting one, a little different. This is another neuroscientist, Wendy Suzuki. Now, she actually also happens to be involved in the moth. But she found out something very interesting about the teller. Our memory is a precious gift, very precious gift. And it provides us with the scaffolding of creating and holding for us who we are as people. That's why I will always say, your story is yours. Right? You get to tell it any way you want. It helps to define us. It's our personal history. Even the little story that you told, that sacred story that your listening partner is now holding as a sacred vessel, holding your story, is a very important piece of who you are. At the same time, though, as you're telling that story, your memories are going to muffle it up a little bit, right? You're not a YouTube video of your life. You can't hit the button and see an exact duplicate of the moment that you're telling about or that you experienced. This is okay. Every time you're going to tell that story, if I asked you to now tell your story again about your name, guaranteed you're going to do it different. At least one little detail. And that's okay. It's your story. You can tell it any way that you want, right? That works for you. I will give you that example. If you go on a vacation with somebody, maybe a sibling, a family vacation, you all go to the same place, you had the same time, you did the same, you come back, and if I asked each one of the people on that vacation, different story from every person, even if you're in the same place, right? Each of us owns our stories in our own way, and that's okay. You get to tell it the way you want. A wonderful chaplain that has written an article about the work that we do as chaplains. So this is a little bit in that, again, in that field of the great work that I feel blessed to do. Rhonda Cooper, who is a hospice chaplain, describes her work as being a story catcher. Right? She is there to receive the story that is being told to her by someone else. She builds this out of a kind of practice called spiritual direction, if you know a little bit about spiritual direction. And in that field, one of the things that they do is a kind of deep listening. And in fact, there's a phrase of listening into voice. Right? So if I deeply listen to somebody, that is, I'm going to sit on my hands. I'm going to really look at them if I can, really pay attention. That might bring out. I don't have to ask anything. That has the potential to bring out their story. Why is all of this important? A lot of it really goes down to the key idea that we want to be heard. We all want to be heard. And the way to be heard is to be deeply listened to. We don't need anything more than that, actually. And in my profession, there are times, and I work with a whole gamut of people. I work with people that are elders. I work with people that are living with mental illness. I work with people that are incarcerated and post-incarcerated, all the time. And sometimes there's nothing more that they can do except to have this story to tell. And there's nothing I can do for them. In fact, as chaplains, we're not problem solvers in that way. This is the best part of my job. I give that over to the mental health professionals. I just get to travel the journey with people. And when I say to them, I hear you, it's a powerful gift. It's a beautiful gift. From the Jewish tradition, to note that we tell stories all the time. So in our tradition of every week in our congregational setting, we hear the story of the Torah, the Bible, and we hear that story every week, right? So that's my story too, right? That's the story of my people. So this is a very common practice, at least in our tradition, and in many other faith traditions, reading sacred text is a way of hearing story, hearing our ancient story. So it's another version of that. There's probably a very prominent way to think about in the Jewish tradition that we most experience an interesting aspect of receiving story, which is at Passover. At Passover, those who are familiar, we have an experience called a Seder, where we sit around the table, family, friends. There's going to be a lot of ritual things that we do, some very ancient, some new and modern to engage us. But the central thing we do is tell a story. And there's a message that we are supposed to accomplish when we do that, is to feel as if I, too, were going in that story, as they say, going out of Egypt. That's the experience that I'm going to have. Now, to do that, you have to put yourself into that story in a way. And the way I do that is to really take in that story. That is another kind of sacred storytelling. When you're a teller, we tell our story to give it substantial place in our lives. It's our truth. We do it to help give us a sense of the circumstances around that storytelling and to own the story. And here I just want to share this aspect to think about. I had a dear friend who, probably 20 years ago, I think she's been gone, who was toward the kind of beginning of the AIDS epidemic, was infected with HIV, a rabbi. And she really was grappling. This is before we now have a whole new world of treatment, right? So before we have what we have now. So it was pretty much a death sentence at some point. And she could not hold it. She must have called me 6 or 8 times and said, Lynn, I got to tell you something. Now, my friend's mind was perfectly clear. And I said, what do you need to tell me, Cindy? She says, I need to tell you this story about what happened to me, what I have, and what I'm going to do. It was pretty much the same story with some details that changed each time. And after about the 6th time or so, Cindy says to me, oh, Lynn, I think I've told you this story before. And I said, maybe, but I'm glad you told it to me again. It was helping her to become real with her story. And I actually recall, I can remember the multiples of times that call came and I would just sit on my couch because I almost knew it was going to happen. And it was about 20 minutes. And then she would say, thanks. And that was the end of the call. Listening and holding the story. One other really amazing moment in the Bible is in Book of Deuteronomy, chapter 32. We just read this, just a couple weeks ago, very end of the Torah, very end of the Bible. There's one chapter that's read as the whole reading for a given Shabbat. It's called Ha'azinu. If you remember the Hebrew I just told you a moment ago, Ozen, Izun. This is called Ha'azinu. It goes like this in the Hebrew, the opening of this chapter. It is Moses in his final words to the people Israel after this incredible journey. And he does this in poetry, mind you, and he says in his opening words, Ha'azinu hashamayim va'adabera v'tishma ha'aretz imrei fi. Give ear, Ha'azinu, O heavens, let me speak, let the earth hear, another word, tishma, shema, hear the words I utter. Wow. Have you ever had the experience of trying to figure out the difference between these two words, hear and listen? Yeah. So here's a lovely person who wrote a drash, Dvar Torah, sort of an interpretation, and she said, it's like this. Yeah, Mom, I hear you, the teen answers her mother. Sure you hear me, the mother replies, but are you listening? Right? Hearing, think of the animal at the front. Yes? Yes?
I think listening has to do with eyes and posture.
Thank you. Yes, we're going to talk a little bit about how to increase our capacity as listeners to really hold stories to bring that healing. But thank you. It is about how we're in presence to that other person. It is posture and listening. And the masks are hard. It can be done, but they're harder. They make it harder. So how often we hear without listening? Oh, I don't know. I've never done that, right? Yeah. I just told you that 10 minutes ago. Right? Have you ever had that one in your house? Right? So remember, if you can, that giving ear, right, hearing, ozen, leads us, right, to the depth of really hearing, really absorbing. What is powerful, I will add, about this particular portion of the Torah and the way this was done is just as almost an aside, but I couldn't not say something about this, is that it is the use of poetry. What is poetry? Poetry is also music. So just a dip, I'm going to take just a pinky toe dip into the world of dementia for a minute because I do a lot of work there. And when people have memory issues, a way to still deeply be heard, for them to hear, is through music. Right? I've got a colleague back here who knows this very well, and I've got a new colleague who's nodding their head, right? So if everything else isn't working, words aren't working, try singing.
Well, a good example was last summer when Tony Bennett did his concert. He has Alzheimer's.
Yes.
And he did the concert and sang those songs he remembered, but
Yep.
the next day he didn't remember anything.
Glenn Campbell did the same thing. If you want to see a brilliant movie, is to see the Glenn Campbell movie. But you as a listener are going to be the more challenged. The teller is, they're going to tell what they know, and that's totally fine. Here, the hard part, and this is what we're trained to do as chaplains, is how to stay present and listen when you hear the same story over and over and over again, right? Or the same word over and over again, or the disassociation that sometimes when we go through memory loss, or people who are in a traumatic space with their mind and their brain, because I also do work with all those kinds of folks too, and that also happens. Right? When we're traumatized, is we can't make sense of much. But as a listener, all we have to do is just to remain present. You don't even need to, per se, seek total clarity, because in the moment, that isn't totally what is needed. What they need is for you to say, I hear you. There's more to it. There's a lot more to it as chaplains, but I'm going to leave it there, because we're not a chaplain course today. So just as to say it again, so hearing, that's simply the act of perceiving sound. Perceiving sound. Listening is the active part of taking it in. It's a conscious choice, if you will, to be a participant really by more than the sounds, but to let it come in to your heart. The phrase that I have next to the animal on that front page, right? A listening ear collects sound. An open heart hears the story. I hear you. I hear you. A lovely quote. I should have probably written this down for you, but if you want to know, it's Michael Nichols, and he wrote in The Lost Art of Listening, listening isn't a need we have, it's a gift we give. I'll just say it one more time for those who are jotting down. Listening isn't a need we have, it's a gift we give. So why does this work? A little bit more. And for this too, I have some quotes here we'll take a moment to kind of think about together. For the teller, because we're all going to be tellers at one point, and by the way, that means we all get to be listeners too, right? So for the tellers, a reminder, we have important stories to tell. This is how we frame who we are. This is how I express who I am. And I only asked you to tell about your name, but think about the myriad of other things that you could have told somebody else about. They are stories no one else can tell because they're yours. And I just want to emphasize that. You get to tell them any way you want. You are made up of a multitude of stories. However you can express them, they are yours to be told. That is every joy and every heartbreak, every mountain that you've climbed and every ditch that you've fallen into. Right? Each has contributed to the complexity of who you are, and here's the bigger picture, that's who we are. That's the we, the large global we. We are all stories. We are all the things that have happened in our lives. Join with me and look, if you will, at the teller box on the front page. I'm going to read it and then see what it does for you. When you choose to share a story, you share a piece of yourself. Stories explain your heart. decode your history, decipher who you are, and translate it all to whoever takes the time to listen carefully. Stories are the currency of community. Wow. They tear down walls, unite cultures, and help people realize they are more alike than different, all while celebrating what is unique to you. Any reflections on that?
Very powerful.
Very powerful, very true. Yeah.
One of the things that has been frustrating for me over the past 10 or 15 years is how people don't have conversations with each other very much anymore. I remember a long time ago, before there were cell phones and stuff like that, you call somebody up on the phone and talk to them for hours on the phone. And they would talk back to you. You'd feel lively, engaging conversation with each other. And now people don't do that anymore. They just kind of text each other.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
you know, you don't really have a conversation that much when you're texting. I mean, you can a little bit, but it's not the same as talking on the phone and laughing and going on and on and on. Oh my God, we've been on the phone for 2 hours already, you know?
Right.
And these days, you know, a lot of people don't talk much, or even when they're together, they're looking at their cell phone,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
rather than paying attention to the person they're talking to.
Thank you. So this little device is anything but a phone, actually. We would be a little better off if it was just a phone. It is a mini computer, basically, right? But it does inhibit this kind of exchange. I was so excited to have been asked to teach here today, but that it was going to be in person, because this is powerful, right? And I forgot who pointed it out. Oh, yes, your face. We're going to look at something in just a second to reinforce this. Your face, your presence, are you slouching? Are you sitting up? Am I going to sleep? You know, all those things are part of the communication that happens. And in story listening, it's a very particular part of that too. I might be saying words that are very powerful with tears coming down my cheeks. Right? So I'm gonna pay attention to, what is that? What's going on? What's coming out from that person? Let's think about the listener. Thank you. Let's think about the listener for a minute. Yes, I'm sorry.
The sad thing is that the power of that second part of that quote, stories are the currency of the community. You could also say they build up walls, they divide cultures.
Yeah.
It's usually, it takes a story in order to get people to really hate each other.
Hmm.
And it has to be a story that gets told with a lot of consistency. And I'm thinking about how dictators generally have managed to rally. It's not around an idea, it's around a story.
Yeah.
A lot of times they're about lies, though.
Yeah.
They're not true stories, but they create something, they create a kind of community. And so, I mean, it's just reinforcing this, that it creates community. But
Not always the best of community.
right.
Yeah, it gives me a moment to just say that there's this phrase out there, words, sticks and stones may break my bones and words may never hurt me, is so not true. Thank you. So not true, right? And in Judaism, we have a very deep teaching, right? You can actually deeply injure somebody by defaming their character with words. It is almost better to just outright kill them, because it's harder to walk the face of the world when you have been that injured, that deeply injured. There's much to say on this topic about language, by the way, and where story can go. We know that if you say something enough, right, we begin to wonder, is that the truth? And we have a lot of injury in the world around that. But I think where we can begin, and maybe that's a session, maybe you'll lead us next time and have us come and contemplate that together. But where I would begin by is, can stories be healing? And I truly believe that when we open up ourselves to being safe, feeling safe enough, which you all took the challenge, and thank you, by telling your story to a stranger, but also taking the challenge to become that listener and hold the story, that's where that safety begins. And we'll leave that part there because I want to look at the listener here for a second. Stories invite conversation. I have a story to tell you, right? Could begin that way. Telling our stories and listening to the stories of other people reminds us that we're in this together. We are all making our way through a world that is sometimes joyful, oftentimes embarrassing, and it's never, ever perfect. Right? So when you tell a story about yourself, right, you own the story, and you say, yeah, that time that I tripped off the curb and my coffee that I had just bought, the latte, and it went flying, you're going to get somebody there with you, right? But the time that you were so upset that you just needed that latte and it left you in tears, you can also get that person there with you. And that's the invitation to the healing, is to be there to hear both those stories. On the handout, you can see it for the listener. Being courageous enough to share a story is very powerful. It's powerful only if there is someone brave enough. So we often think that the only person who has to be brave is the teller. But what I'm going to say is brave enough to listen with an open heart and mind. Right? So I don't mean to single anybody out, but you don't want to have to pull it out of somebody. You don't actually need to do that. You just need to sit and just acknowledge. You might say, wow, oof, that's hard. We learn as chaplains reflective listening. That's a technique, but it's one that you can employ. I'll just put it out there. I'm not going to tell you how to do it, but it's kind of how it sounds. And also, I'll tell you another great thing is curiosity. And the best curiosity question is, I'm curious. Can you tell me more? Simple. Right? Just tell me more. So there are two sides to this whole thing. In the inside, wait, I want to make sure I have the right page. Yes. Because I gave you something extra here. That's just for you. But on the inside page, this is some things for the listener to think about as our time is marching to the end. Wow. How good a listener are you? Just going to pose these questions and think about them with you for a few moments here. Since you think about 4 times faster than a person usually talks, pause. Do you do that? Okay, you don't have to raise your hand. How many of you have already planned your dinner for tonight during the course of sitting here? And how many of you are thinking about, yeah, I'm going to go get that latte after this class? Yeah. I'm going out to the lake, and then I'm going to go run that errand. Right? You've done all of that sitting here. No worries. That's what we do. That's the power of our brain. But if you think about it as a listener, since you think 4 times faster than a person usually talks, do you use this time to think about other things while you're keeping track of the conversation? Right? How present are you? So we as chaplains, a phrase I like to use, we listen with an empty head. That I'm not excluding what the person is telling me. I'm emptying all of my stuff out. Right? I'm going to park it somewhere. Park it back here. Park it in the other car that I left when I came into whomever I'm going to meet with. Second thing, do you listen primarily for facts rather than ideas when someone is speaking? What's the advantage or disadvantage to listen for facts, right, versus ideas? What is that speaking to? You missed
too much of the story.
Uh-huh. What was that date again? Was that Tuesday or was that Wednesday that you mean? Yes, there was another hand.
You have to be careful not to read stuff into it. Just let it be their story, not what you think.
Yes, right. Let it be their story. Yes.
In the first session, the speaker was telling a story from a book that I've just read, and he told it wrong. And I was like, part of me wanted to raise my hand and be like, no, that's not how it happened. And it was very like, what is that line between like, it's somebody else's story, so you don't want to mess up the facts, because like when you were talking earlier about like telling your own story, it's your story to tell, but like, yeah, kind of letting go of like the perfection of somebody else's story and just like, okay, but what is the point? Why is he telling this story? And not worrying so much about the facts.
Right. Good. Other thoughts? Yes.
On the flip side too, it depends on the purpose of your listening. If I have worked in a role where I need to hear information, specific facts from people, and they may be in more of a storytelling mood, and so I need to give them the space to do that, but I also need to hear what I need to record. If that makes sense? So
Yeah.
I may not be in the chaplain empty mind space, but I need to also allow them the space to tell it in the way they need to, while also hearing, okay, there's that, they got to that. So
Yes.
we can get to the next thing.
Yeah.
I'm curious, I think Rabbi did about something you said earlier
who continuously told you about her illness and what was going to happen. And I'm wondering, I understand your view that she had something to say, and I'm wondering perhaps if you had said, yes, you've talked about that before, would have taken to her another level, would she have felt heard, would have been important enough that it was important enough for you to remember? I mean, would that have changed? Did you ever think about that part of it, or how does that fit in with your belief of she needed to tell you, but had you remembered, might that have changed for her?
Yeah, it's a great question if I had interrupted her telling, and maybe at the end. I don't think I did at the end. I acknowledged the honesty that I'm so grateful that she had told me the story. I didn't want to give her any guilt or any bad feeling because she was processing heavily of, I got to hold this truth. I cannot believe this is happening to me. And I see some heads nodding because you might have had that experience. You've told somebody several times, maybe different people, the same story because you just cannot believe that this is something that's part of your life. So it's a good point.
But could have taken her another level, perhaps? Did you ever think of that, or is that part of the conversation?
Well, honestly, I'll tell you, at that point, I was just merely a rabbi, and I wasn't a board-certified chaplain, so I only knew certain things. Maybe if I was a chaplain, I would have known more, which is what I say, is like, I'm so glad to be a chaplain. So maybe it could have, possibly. And there are some things, again, I'm not divulging in the work of chaplaincy just because it's too big a field, that can help bring out more from a person. And it's often, I'll just lean into this, it's often the curiosity factor. It's the tell me more, right? Where's that leaving you now? Wow. You can even just, wow. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Yes?
I wanted to respond to what you were saying because I think your mere presence as a listener is the most important thing. And to hear the story again and again and again and again and again is the most important thing. And to interrupt somebody or remind them of maybe that they've shared it before could be damaging. That's just my personal experience as a good listener, and also someone that wants to be listened to. I've had people tell me, you already told me that. You already told me that.
Oh, I'm not saying like that.
No. So I wanted to,
hurtful
and you weren't.
insensitive.
I wanted to offer, it's certainly not, because we had a lovely interaction at lunch, right? So I hear you, and I think it's so important
And it's
just
an individual thing. Each person is different and how you respond to them. And you would, if you know the person well, it's different. And,
I'm going to just move us a little ahead, but I so appreciate this. Thank you. And I'll stick around a little bit afterwards if there's some more things to say. If you look down the list of questions, all of these are very provocative and are meant to help kind of clue us in as the listener part. On number 6, do certain words and phrases prejudice you so you cannot listen objectively? This almost always will happen, right? And we as the listeners have to learn to receive that, hold it, and not let it clog up our hearing. And that's really hard because there's some really hard stories out there. People have had very hard histories. Histories that they are a part of the continuing story of that history that is influencing their moment in this world right now. And those are hard stories. And sometimes the words that are used are offensive and challenging. And you have to think about the environment in the moment that you're in, right? What's the purpose? And we didn't talk anything about that because the session is only about an hour, right? But the reason that you're even there as the story listener, right? And the circumstances that bring you to that moment. If I were to emphasize anything again, it's to being available to say, I hear you. I hear you. I might not, by the way, totally get it, but you are heard. I hear you. And I might have to say, can you tell me that again?
You might not always agree.
Oh, this is not my opinion at all. This is just me being the receiver of somebody else's, and I haven't used the word, right, but it could be somebody else's pain. Somebody else's challenge, somebody else's difficulty. And I've just glancing blow on this, but I will also, again, just tell you, because in my life I have people who are perfectly fine, but they are repetitive storytellers. They don't remember that they've told me that story. It's as fresh as the first time, and I smile, Tell it to me again. I don't even say again. Please tell me. Right? So, by way of just moving us toward the end, and I wish we had more time together. One thing before we look at this lovely, excuse me, script at the end, for years and years and years, I kept using a quote, and I still use this, when I meet a new client or somebody in the hospital for the first time, and I introduce my program, especially as a chaplain, I always will say, this is the time you're going to hear me talk the most, and after this, you're going to hardly hear me because I am here to hear you. That's my job. I'm going to be here to listen to you. God gave me 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Listen twice as much as you talk. I thought it was Jewish wisdom. We'll own it, but it's actually a Greek theological from the Greeks. So in this picture, just to point out a few things as we're drawing to a close, I really didn't want to have a PowerPoint, you can see. I really wanted us to be together and not looking at a screen. So this is the only moment that I wished I had a little video to show you. So I'm going to try to animate this for you. If you know the movie inside out, I can't play all the characters, but just to run you up to the scene, right, if you haven't seen the movie. So this is these characters, these senses that are inside of this young little girl, and the world goes kaplooey, and we're in the kaplooey part of the world. How's that for doing that really fast? So the characters you're looking at are named Sadness is the little character in the color blue, and Bing Bong is her toy, now all big and animated, right? And here they are. Sadness is sitting next to Bing Bong in this other world and says, I'm sorry they took your rocket. They took something that you loved. It's gone forever. With Bing Bong saying, it's all I had left of Riley, the little girl. I bet you and Riley had great adventures. And Bing Bong says, they were wonderful. Once we flew back in time, we had breakfast twice that day. Sadness, that's amazing. I bet Riley liked it. Oh, she did, said Bing Bong. We were best friends. Yeah, it's sad. And then Bing Bong puts his head on Sadness's shoulder and cries, and Sadness keeps her arm around him until he's done. Now there's another character, Joy, standing off to the side, looking at this conversation, and says, how did you do that? And Sadness says, I don't know. He was sad, so I listened. It's the quintessential chaplain moment of that entire movie. So I'm going to leave you with just a few last thoughts and then a few moments for more questions. What we all want most in this world, I believe, is to be deeply heard. I hear you. At the core, stories remind us that there is always the potential for people to care. And then I'm going to leave you with a quote. A colleague of mine, Rabbi Alfredo Borodovsky, is a rabbi. He lives on the East Coast. He lives with mental illness. He's got a blog. You can go look him up. He wrote at Yom Kippur, based on a piece of liturgy that is a strong repeated part of the prayers that we just did a few weeks ago. The prayer in Hebrew begins Shema Kolenu. So those who are familiar with our liturgy might know those words. It just gets repeated a few times, which means hear our voice. And this is what he wrote around Yom Kippur. It is a central prayer of the High Holy Days, Shema Kolenu. Listen to our voice. As it leaves our lips, we long for somebody to listen to what we can't utter. And then once our voices, not words, are heard, Chus v'rachem aleinu, more words in the prayer, we seek compassion for our aching souls. Listening into healing, right? I invite you to become listeners and to stay as tellers, because we need to hear your stories, and hopefully we'll be available to listen. I thank you very much.